In August 1971, a Stanford professor turned a basement hallway into a prison. He recruited college students, honor roll kids, clean records, no history of violence, and randomly assigned them roles, guard or prisoner. Within 48 hours, the guards were forcing prisoners to strip naked, do push-ups, and clean toilets with their bare hands. By day 6, the experiment had spiraled so far out of control that it had to be shut down. One prisoner had a complete mental breakdown, screaming, "I can't take it anymore." Another went on a hunger strike. The guards? They said they were just doing their job. This is the story of how an experiment meant to study human behavior became one of psychology's darkest scandals, and how, 50 years later, we're still not sure what it actually proved. Before we dive in, if you're new here, welcome to The Sleeping Psychologist, where I uncover the strangest experiments and biggest scandals in psychology that you most probably slept through. The Stanford Prison Experiment is one of those stories everyone's heard of, but the truth is way darker and messier than you think. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And drop a comment. If you were randomly assigned to be a guard in this experiment, do you think you'd become cruel? Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The background. The year was 1971, and America was in chaos. The Vietnam War was raging. Protests were everywhere. And prisons? They were powder kegs. Just a year earlier, at Attica Correctional Facility in New York, tensions between guards and prisoners had exploded into one of the deadliest prison riots in U.S. history. The question on everyone's mind was, why? Why did prison guards act so brutally? Why did prisoners become so desperate? Were these people just inherently bad? Or was something about the prison environment itself turning ordinary humans into monsters? Enter Philip Zimbardo. He was a 38-year-old psychology professor at Stanford University with a major interest in social psychology, how situations shape behavior. Zimbardo believed that evil wasn't something you were born with. It was something that environments created. He'd already done research on anonymity and de-individuation, the idea that when people lose their sense of individual identity, they do things they'd never normally do. Now he wanted to test this idea on a bigger scale. What if you put good people in a bad system? Would the system win? So Zimbardo designed an experiment. He'd create a simulated prison right there on Stanford's campus. In the basement of Jordan Hall, he'd recruit college students, normal, psychologically healthy young men, and randomly assign them to play either guards or prisoners. No scripts, no training, just 2 roles and a fake prison. He wanted to see if the situation alone, being in a position of power or powerlessness, would change how people behaved. To recruit participants, Zimbardo placed an ad in local newspapers. Male college students needed for psychological study of prison life. $15 per day for 1 to 2 weeks. 75 guys responded. Zimbardo and his team screened them carefully with psychological tests and interviews. They eliminated anyone with a history of crime, psychological issues, or medical problems. The final 24 participants were chosen specifically because they were the most stable, most average, most normal. These were not troubled kids. They were honor students, future doctors and lawyers, guys who'd never been in trouble with the law. They had no idea what they were about to experience. On August 14, 1971, the Stanford Prison Experiment began. 12 students were assigned to be prisoners. 9 were assigned to be guards. 3 were backups. The guards got uniforms, mirrored sunglasses, and wooden batons. The prisoners? They were about to find out what it felt like to lose their freedom. Chapter 2. The Setup. Zimbardo didn't do things halfway. He wanted this fake prison to feel real. So he enlisted the help of the Palo Alto Police Department. On that quiet Sunday morning, actual police officers went to the homes of the 9 prisoners and arrested them. No warning, no explanation. The students who'd signed up for what they thought was a harmless psychology study were suddenly being handcuffed, read their rights, and put into police cars while their neighbors watched. They were taken to the station, fingerprinted, and booked. Then they were blindfolded and driven to Stanford. When they arrived at Jordan Hall, they were stripped, searched, deloused with a spray, and given prison uniforms, which were actually just smocks with their prisoner numbers on the front and back. No underwear. They were given nylon stocking caps to simulate having their heads shaved. Each prisoner was assigned a number. From that moment on, they were no longer students. They were 8,612, 416, 819. Their identities were erased. The guards, meanwhile, got a very different treatment. They wore khaki uniforms and mirrored sunglasses, so prisoners couldn't see their eyes or read their emotions. They carried wooden batons and were told they were in charge. Zimbardo gave them a list of rules to enforce. Prisoners must address guards as Mr. Correctional Officer. Prisoners must obey all orders. Prisoners must remain silent during rest periods. But here's the key detail that Zimbardo emphasized for years. He told the guards they could not use physical violence, but they had to maintain order by any means necessary. What he didn't say publicly for decades was that he also told them something else. According to archival recordings uncovered in 2018 by French researcher Thibault Letexier, Zimbardo explicitly instructed the guards to create feelings of fear, frustration, and powerlessness. He told them their job was to make the prisoners feel like they had no control. One guard, Dave Eshelman, later said that Zimbardo's research assistant told him directly, "You have to be tough. You have to show them who's boss." Zimbardo himself took on the role of prison superintendent. His graduate student assistants became wardens. This wasn't just an observation study. Zimbardo was embedded in the system he was studying. He was part of the experiment. And that, as we'll see, was a massive problem. On that first day, everything seemed fine. The prisoners joked around. The guards were awkward, unsure how to act. It felt like a game, like a performance. But by the second day, that would change. One guard, the one who'd later be nicknamed John Wayne by the prisoners because of his southern accent and swagger, decided to take his role very, very seriously. His name was Dave Eshelman, and he was about to turn the Stanford Prison Experiment into a living nightmare. Chapter 3. The Real Experiment. It started with a rebellion. On the morning of day 2, the prisoners ripped off their stocking caps, barricaded themselves inside their cells using their beds, and started taunting the guards. It was a test. A way of saying, "You're not really in charge." And for the guards, it was a challenge they couldn't ignore. Dave Eshelman, the guard who'd embraced his role most fully, led the response. He rallied the other guards. They grabbed fire extinguishers and blasted the prisoners with carbon dioxide through the cell bars until they backed down. Then they stripped the prisoners, took their beds away, and threw the ringleaders into solitary confinement, a tiny closet that had been repurposed as the hole. The rebellion was crushed in less than an hour. But the guards didn't stop there. They decided to break the prisoners psychologically. They forced them to do push-ups, sometimes with a guard standing on their backs. They made them clean toilet bowls with their bare hands. They woke them up in the middle of the night for counts, where prisoners had to stand and recite their numbers over and over until the guards were satisfied. These counts started lasting hours. Prisoners who messed up or talked back were punished with more push-ups, more time in the hole, or having their mattresses taken away so they had to sleep on concrete. Eshelman, the John Wayne guard, was the cruelest. He invented degrading games. He made prisoners simulate sex acts with each other. He forced them to sing songs, to insult each other, to act like animals. Other guards followed his lead. Not all of them. Some guards were uncomfortable and stayed passive, but enough of them participated to create a culture of abuse. The prisoners began to crack. Prisoner number 8,612 a student named Douglas Corpy was the first to break. Just 36 hours into the experiment, he started screaming. "I can't take it anymore," he yelled. "Jesus Christ, I'm burning up inside. I can't stand another night." He was shaking, crying, incoherent. Zimbardo's team brought him out for an interview. Corpy begged to leave. But here's where it gets disturbing. Zimbardo didn't immediately let him go. Instead, he told Corpy he could leave, but framed it like Corpy was quitting and would be seen as weak by the other prisoners. When Corpy didn't leave right away, Zimbardo interpreted that as consent to continue. Hours later, Zimbardo finally released him. Then there was prisoner number 416, a student named Clay Ramsey. When he realized he couldn't just walk out whenever he wanted, he went on a hunger strike. The guards responded by throwing him into solitary confinement and offering the other prisoners a choice: give up your blankets or leave number 416 in the hole overnight. Most prisoners chose to keep their blankets. By day 4, the prisoners were no longer acting. They'd internalized their roles. They referred to themselves by their numbers. They obeyed orders without question. They shuffled when they walked, heads down, voices flat. They'd become prisoners. And the guards? Many of them later admitted they enjoyed the power. They looked forward to their shifts. They invented new punishments just to see what would happen. The line between simulation and reality had completely disappeared. Chapter 4: The Dark Twist. But here's the twist that changes everything about this story. The Stanford Prison Experiment might have been a lie from the very beginning. For decades, Philip Zimbardo presented his findings as proof of situational evil, the idea that normal people will do terrible things when placed in toxic environments. He gave TED Talks, wrote books, testified in court cases. The experiment became one of the most famous studies in psychology, taught in every intro psych class in America. It was the ultimate cautionary tale about human nature. Except recent evidence suggests Zimbardo wasn't just observing what happened. He was directing it. In 2018, Thibault Letexier, a French science historian, gained access to Zimbardo's archived materials at Stanford University recordings, notes, transcripts that had been locked away for decades. What he found was damning. The guards didn't spontaneously become abusive. They were coached. Zimbardo and his research assistants actively encouraged the guards to be harsh. They praised guards who were tough and criticized those who were too lenient. One recording shows a researcher telling a guard, "You have to be tough. You have to show them you're serious." Dave Eshelman, the John Wayne guard, later admitted he was acting. He said he'd seen the movie Cool Hand Luke, a prison film with a sadistic Southern warden, the night before the experiment started, and he decided to base his character on that. He wasn't becoming a monster. He was playing one. And he knew that's what Zimbardo wanted. Even more explosive. Douglas Corpy, prisoner number 8612, the one who had the mental breakdown that convinced everyone the experiment was dangerously real, he later admitted he faked it. Corpy was a graduate student who had an important exam coming up. He wanted out of the study, but he'd signed a contract. So he pretended to have a breakdown because he thought that was the only way they'd let him leave. It worked, but Zimbardo used footage of Corpy's breakdown for decades as proof of how psychologically damaging the experiment was, without ever mentioning that Corpy says it was an act. And remember how Zimbardo said he didn't know what would happen, that the experiment was unscripted. Letexier's research showed that wasn't true either. Zimbardo had run a similar experiment a year before a practice run with high school students in a campus dorm. He knew what to expect. He knew the guards would become aggressive if pushed. This wasn't a blind scientific study. It was a demonstration designed to produce a specific result. Zimbardo had a hypothesis, and he made sure his experiment proved it. The entire foundation of the Stanford Prison Experiment, its spontaneity, its authenticity, its scientific validity, was questionable at best and fraudulent at worst. Chapter 5. The Aftermath. So what finally stopped the experiment? It wasn't Zimbardo's conscience. It wasn't the prisoner's suffering. It was a woman named Christina Maslach. Maslach was a recent Stanford psychology PhD graduate and Zimbardo's girlfriend at the time. On day 5, she came to observe the experiment. She watched the guards march prisoners to the bathroom with bags over their heads. She saw them chained together, shuffling in lockstep. She heard the verbal abuse, the dehumanization, and she was horrified. That night, she confronted Zimbardo. "What you're doing to those boys is terrible," she told him. "I'm not sure I can continue in a relationship with someone who does this kind of thing." Out of the 50 people who observed the experiment during those 6 days, other psychologists, graduate students, even the prisoners' parents, during visiting hours, Christina Maslach was the only one who objected. Everyone else either didn't see a problem or was too intimidated to speak up. But Maslach's intervention worked. She made Zimbardo realize the experiment had gone too far. On day 6, August 20th, 1971, Zimbardo ended the Stanford Prison Experiment. The participants were debriefed. Zimbardo brought everyone together, guards and prisoners, and had them talk about what happened. Some guards were defensive. Others seemed shocked by their own behavior. The prisoners were angry, traumatized, confused. Zimbardo assured them it was all just a simulation, just an experiment. There's no evidence of long-term psychological damage to the participants. Douglas Corpy went on to become a respected forensic psychologist. Dave Eshelman, the brutal guard, later expressed regret for his actions. Most of the participants stayed in touch with Zimbardo over the years. Some defended the study. Others distanced themselves from it. Zimbardo, meanwhile, became famous. He published his findings, gave lectures, wrote a best-selling book called The Lucifer Effect. He became the go-to expert on why good people do bad things, but he also faced mounting criticism. Ethicists pointed out that the experiment violated nearly every principle of informed consent and participant welfare. Scientists questioned the methodology. By the time Zimbardo died in October 2024 at age 91, his legacy was deeply contested. Chapter 6. The Modern Implications. But here's the thing. Even if the Stanford Prison Experiment was flawed, even if it was staged, even if the results were exaggerated, it still had a massive impact on the real world. In 2004, the world saw photos that looked disturbingly familiar. At Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, American soldiers were abusing Iraqi detainees. Zimbardo himself was called as an expert witness in the court-martial of one of the guards. He argued that the soldiers weren't bad apples. They were good people corrupted by a bad system. Sound familiar? That's exactly what he'd argued about his Stanford guards 33 years earlier. But there's a problem with that narrative. If the Stanford experiment was coached, if the guards were acting on instructions from authority figures, then maybe the lesson isn't about situational evil. Maybe the lesson is about obedience to authority. That's a different psychological phenomenon, one already demonstrated by Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments in the 1960s. The Stanford Prison Experiment doesn't prove that prisons make people cruel. It proves that when authority figures encourage cruelty and give people permission to harm others, some people will comply. That's not new. And it's not nearly as surprising as Zimbardo made it sound. So why does the Stanford Prison Experiment still matter? Because it forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. When we see abuse of power in prisons, in police departments, in military settings, how much of it is systemic and how much is individual choice? If Dave Eshelman was just following instructions, is he less responsible for his actions? Or does just following orders stop being an excuse when you're forcing people to simulate sex acts for your amusement? The truth is, human behavior isn't simple. We're not blank slates shaped entirely by our environments. But we're also not immune to social pressure. The Stanford Prison Experiment is a flawed study that got a lot of things wrong. But it got one thing right. Situations matter. Roles matter. And when systems give people unchecked power, some of them will abuse it. The guards didn't become sadistic because prisons are inherently evil. They became sadistic because they were told to, because they thought it was expected, and because no one stopped them until it was too late. 50 years later, the Stanford Prison Experiment remains one of the most controversial studies in psychology. It's been debunked, defended, reinterpreted, and mythologized. Philip Zimbardo spent his entire career arguing that it revealed a fundamental truth about human nature. Critics say it was a fraud that never should have happened. The real lesson here isn't about prisons or guards or prisoners. It's about how we tell stories. Zimbardo turned a messy, ethically dubious basement experiment into a parable about good and evil. He edited out the parts that didn't fit his narrative, the coaching, the acting, the manipulation. And for decades, the world believed him. If you want to see more deep dives into psychology's most famous and most controversial experiments, subscribe to The Sleeping Psychologist. We've got more stories you slept through coming up next. Thanks for watching. And remember, question everything, even the studies that seem too perfect to be true, because sometimes they are.